All right, so we have talked previously about outcomes, um, and I mentioned briefly a needs assessment, but because of this assignment, I just want to spend some time giving you an example of how I've done needs assessments and how they've helped me. And so so you'll get a good idea of what you might do for a needs assessment. So just from the book, needs assessment is a type of evaluation. Um, and it's typically conducted prior to designing a more comprehensive program. Why design a program if it's not going to meet the needs of the population that you want to serve? So, I think that um, I want to give you two examples. I want to give you a school counseling example, and then I want to give you a clinical mental health counseling example. So, when I got my very first job as a school counselor, um, I had three elementary schools and 500 kids in each school. And basically, and I knew the previous counselor, they had graduated before me, but I think after talking with them, they said, oh, this is a great school district to work for, but they were completely overwhelmed and burnout. I mean, running from different schools, and what was basically happening is they were putting out fires. So they had maybe a day scheduled at one elementary school, and then there was, emergencies at another school. They had to cancel everything, go take care of the emergencies, and it was just very frustrating. And they didn't feel like there was any way to organize three schools and 1,500 kids. So, I think with a needs assessment and with the number of students that school counselors still work with, it's still overwhelming. Might not be 1,503 schools, but even if you have one counselor in a school, 500 kids is still a lot of kids, you know. So, um, so I think that a lot of school counselors do find themselves reacting rather than preventing or uh, working with specific problems to prevent future problems. So when I started, uh, I in my interview and when they brought me on, I was planning to stay at least 2 or 3 years. And I said, that they had to give me some time to create a program. So what I was doing was I was asking for basically some flexibility and understanding for the first half of the academic year so that I could do a needs assessment and create a new program and then see how it worked and doing a little evaluation, how to go, you know, and then tweak it, make some changes based on how it was working or not working. So, you know, I think that um, it's important to acknowledge and include everyone who is invested in the process. So, I'm not just going to do a needs assessment with students or clients. I'm not just going to do a needs assessment with parents or guardians, not just going to do one with teachers, principals, administration, if it's in clinical mental health or counselors. I'm going to do it with all of those parties so that everybody feels like they are heard and have a say in the process. And So I really, picked three different domains to do the needs assessment. And I think each one had its own role in the success or failure of this process. The most important one is the students, because that's who I was there to serve primarily. If I had to name a client, it was students. So the second one was parents and guardians. They often felt unheard, uh, and that they would get calls, oh, your child's in trouble or failing or whatever. And, so they were always getting bad news, not good news. And so, and then the third part of the population was teachers and administration. I did group them together. And so the first thing, if there is a program in place, if there's not, you don't have to worry about this first section, but you can look at other programs that are already in place and see what's working and what's not. But the first thing I wanted to do was create an assessment, which is basically a survey. And I wanted to find out what was working, what wasn't working, and what wasn't being addressed at all. Okay. Now, obviously, each one of those domains or populations saw things differently. Teachers were really looking at academic success and behavior. And parents, wanted a happy child that wasn't failing or getting in trouble or having behavior problems as well, but from a different perspective than a teacher might see it. And then students, have a unique vision because parents are talking about the student, teachers are talking about the students. What are the students saying or thinking or feeling in this whole process? So it's important, to address the students as well. One thing I had to consider was the age and role of each one of these types of people. So population. So, for example, I wanted to even give kindergartners the assessment, but they might not even be able to read yet. So the teacher was going to read each question and they got to circle, smiley face, frown, neutral, something else. So, they had a lot of assistance in taking the assessment. And so we came up, I asked each population, what are some things I should put in this assessment? And of course, the first thing they offered was everything that wasn't working. Oh, we need this isn't going well, this is a waste of time, whatever. And that's fine because we do need to include that. But we also need to include what is working. What do you think is going well? And the wording of each question, we actually have to have three slightly different assessments that are asking the same thing, because the wording is different for children, parents or guardians, teachers, and administration. And each one has slightly different priorities. So we came up with all kinds of things. Of course, the main things were study skills and behavior and communication and let's see what else. Bullying was one. Having a universal I don't know what the right don't want to call it discipline, but a universal program that every teacher uses. At that point, every teacher used a different method of reinforcing behavior. Like they might have had a token economy, and another one might have had something different going on, like extra recess, or, so everyone was handling it differently. So I I thought it would be a very positive thing to have a school-wide vocabulary and program, so that no matter what classroom a child went into, everybody would have the same expectations, the same vocabulary, the same language, and things like that. Um, Individual problems included, or issues included, things like separation or divorce of parents, um, stress or anxiety, uh, grief and loss. And none of those issues were currently being addressed. So we came up with the assessment, you know. The main concepts are what's already working, what's not working, what's not being addressed that needs to be addressed. So the and I picked various parts of the population, divided it into segments like students, teachers, admin, parents, guardians. So when we look at the assignment, I think honestly, the easiest thing to do would be to use the population you're writing your paper about. You don't have to, but I think that would be the easiest. And if you're working with a partner, you can do that together. You've already got a partner if you wanted one. So I just think that would save a lot of time and energy and research. And you can just do it with your current partner or alone if you don't have a partner, and your current topic and population and issue. So that's the concept behind a needs assessment. The second thing I did, we got the needs assessment back, and we got rid of everything that wasn't working, or we changed it in some way that we thought would help it to be successful. And we added a few new things as well. We created a brand new universal program where everybody was using the same language. It was called the Stop and Think program, which is basically kind of a cognitive behavioral program. Kids learn to catch themselves, remind themselves to think before they act. Is it a good decision, bad decision? What's going to be the possible consequences? Do I need to change my thoughts before I act? If so, yes, what am I going to do instead? If not, give it a shot. Try it out. If it didn't work out, evaluate the situation and, make some changes for the future. So we had, in-school trainings for teachers. I went around to every classroom and taught them the Stop and Think program. We had things that they could color that had the steps, and we tape it on their desk. And everybody was on the same page with that. So then the next step, so that took about a month, the first month of school. And I was still doing all the regular stuff, but I think that investment of time and energy was well worth it. Okay, so the next thing I did was I kept track of my daily time usage. And mainly I wanted to see how did I use my time? Was it being used efficiently? And by that, I mean, was I seeing 5 kids a day for the same problem, but I was seeing them individually? when I could probably put those kids in a group. And that group would only take an hour or 45 minutes. But if I saw 5 kids individually, it would take a couple hours. So I kept track of how I used my time, how many students I saw, and what the primary issue was. And then I tallied it up at the end of the week and wanted to see, and I did this for a couple months. And the result was that I was seeing a lot of students for anger. And all of the previous groups were basically how to use coping skills with anger, how to control your anger. But none of them addressed what was beneath the anger. And the anger is just going to come out again or build up again unless you address those deeper issues that resulted in anger. So we decided to create an anger group, and I didn't want to announce it on the intercom, the speaker, hey, anger groups meeting in the library. So we had to come up with cool names that you could announce. So grizzly bears, polar bears, their mascot was a bear, and meeting in the library. The parents who were separated or divorced, banana splits group. So we came up with creative names for these groups. And you know, I think that really these groups, and I did one for each grade level because they had 3 different schedules. And it would have been too many to put in one group if I did it by school. So I did one group per grade level. And that vastly improved my time management and how many students I could see. The next thing was if teachers were reporting major issues across the board, like study skills, or anxiety for like testing or something like that, or maybe bullying, those were things that I thought every student needed to hear about and learn about. And so I created guidance lessons for every single classroom. And so every student got that information. And then it was reinforced by teachers. So, and then at the end of the first half of the school year, I sent out kind of an evaluation. How's it going? How are these changes working for you? What's not working? What's working? What's still not being addressed? And it was, it still wasn't perfect, but it was a lot more positive. And another thing that was happening is that whereas the previous counselor was putting out fires and seeing children for emergencies or problems, I actually got to know every student in the schools because at the least they saw me in the classroom. So I got to know everybody. They felt comfortable coming to me. They knew who I was and got to know every teacher. They're glad I'm leading the lesson. They get to, chill for an hour or 45 minutes. And so it was a pretty successful needs assessment and revision for creation of programs. The last thing I want to add is that, everything comes down to funding. It doesn't matter whether it's in a school or a community agency, And I knew from the beginning that I didn't want to do 3 schools forever. I'd get burnt out pretty quickly, even if I did do a needs assessment and manage my time correctly. So the last thing I did was at the end of every month, I would write up a report for the school board. And it gave statistics. Hey, we're running these groups, we're running this many groups, teaching these lessons, so many grade levels, these are special activities, saw this many students, basic stats, but it showed them how much a counselor was doing in each of the schools. The other thing it included was some form of good news. So, maybe, so one program I did was uh, my internship had been at a school where it had a 99% minority population. And most of the kids were from Harrisburg, Philly, Pittsburgh, um, more urban areas. And they lived at the school. And the uh, the three schools that I had were very rural, and definitely anything but a minority population, and a totally different environment. You know, so I thought that I would love these kids to meet each other and get to know each other. And so I came up with email was like brand new then. They had both schools got a grant for a computer lab. And so I worked with the computer teacher and they were teaching all the kids how to use email. And then I worked with the English teacher and they were teaching the kids how to write a letter. What do you include in the letter? How do you get to know the other person? What kind of things do you ask? What kind of things do you share? You know, and you know, and so we included this in the classes, and they all had email pen pals. And we did this in one grade, and it later expanded to multiple grades. And at the end of the year, um, uh, one school agreed to pay for busing the kids to the other school, and the other school agreed to pay for lunch for everybody. And they all got to meet each other. And the beautiful thing was that it's like they already knew each other. They had gotten to know each other without any previous biases or, preconceived notions, because everything was in an email. And they got to ask questions and really get to know the other person. So when they actually met, they were already friends. And I know that many of them continued to be, friends for years after that. And we wrote up the program, and they took pictures of everybody at the picnic, and um, you know, it was a really, I think, nice thing, good experience. And so that's an example of what I would include in the report for the school board. So at the end of the first year, I had to meet with the principals and, hey, how's things going my first year? And I'm ready for a lot of feedback, and but they're like, you know, every school board meeting, they save your report for last. And I'm like, uh-oh, why? And they're like, because yours is the only good news they get. Because everybody else is complaining about funding and saying what they need. And all you're doing is sharing good news. So eventually, at the end of my second year, I went back to school. But when I left, they ended up hiring two school counselors for that position instead of just one. So I think the needs assessment and the tallying of my time and the good news instead of complaining, uh, kind of, resulted in a positive thing. They saw that a school counselor was worthwhile and worth the investment uh, of their school finances. So that's the school example. Any questions or comments, or do you have any examples, anything you want to share? Questions about the needs assessment in a school? All right. So my clinical mental health example isn't quite as long, but I think it's just as valid. And the first agency I worked for was in Gettysburg, PA. It was in a very rural area. It was also, I don't know what the right word is, but plainly biased. Uh, so when I went there, and they would get a new client, um, basically think of any bias that's out in the world. And, you know, it was a fairly closed community. So I was fairly liberal. So I took every client that everybody else didn't want to take. And honestly, I would have gotten bored with behavior problems or relationship problems or things like that. I wanted to experience all kinds of clients. So um, I got to work with the psychiatrist and got to learn about things like sex changes and um, things that at that time I had no experience with. Um, but I wanted to learn about all of these different areas of counseling. I wanted to learn about the more severe diagnoses like schizophrenia. I wanted to learn about all the different medications. So it was a great learning process for me. The interesting thing about the needs assessment for that agency, and I didn't make it up, but I helped to create it, is that um, the clients that were perhaps marginalized in some way in that community, um, I think they felt comfortable with me, even if I might not have known or been familiar with everything they were going through. Um, but we built that trusting relationship, and I was willing to learn. And but um, but I think that the agency didn't realize that, like they thought all of these various populations were much smaller than they actually were. And the whole goal of a clinical mental health agency in a small community is to meet the broad range of needs in the community. And what they discovered was that here they had one therapist who was seeing all of the diverse clients. And um, I could not see all of them. And so they began to open up a little bit and have some more training programs and wanted their therapists to become more comfortable with diversity and all other types of issues. And um, so I think that needs assessment simply showed that no, they weren't meeting the needs of the community. And the whole mission statement of the agency was to meet the needs of everybody in the community, not just a certain type of person. And I think they realized that they were missing out on that they weren't really fulfilling their mission statement. Um, so, so I had a good learning process. I had a great experience. I met a lot of great people and grew a lot myself. And but I think that at the end of 2 or 3 years, I think the agency began to grow a little bit as well. You know, not in numbers, but just in, openness and acceptance. I think they probably still had a long way to go, but at least the door was open and they were beginning the process. And this was a long time ago, this was like 1993. So hopefully they've come even further since then. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use a needs assessment. And yeah, so I'm going to stop this and then we're going to take a quick break and then we're just going to go over the assignment and see if anybody has any questions. Yeah, so that'll be it.